I never imagined that taking a part-time service job would end up changing the way I saw myself more than 4 years of school ever did. At the time, I only wanted enough money to cover a few monthly expenses and stop asking my family for help every week. I walked into my first shift, convinced the hardest part would be remembering procedures or carrying trays without dropping anything. I was wrong. The hardest part was discovering what kind of person I became when 10 people needed something from me at the same time, and none of them wanted to wait. On my first busy afternoon, I remember hearing overlapping voices from every direction. Someone needed a replacement order, another person wanted to pay immediately, a child spilled a drink near the entrance, and a coworker quietly asked if I could help because they were falling behind too. My heart raced so fast that I could almost hear it over the noise. I froze for a second until a senior colleague walked past and whispered, "Pick one thing that stops everything else, then keep moving." I did exactly that, cleaned the spill before someone slipped, handled the waiting payment, and then worked through the rest, one by one. Nothing became magically easy, but I learned that panic wastes time while priorities create it. That realization stayed with me long after the shift ended. During the following weeks, I met people I would never have crossed paths with otherwise. Some customers greeted me with a smile before saying anything else. Others barely looked up from their phones. One elderly man apologized 3 times for asking a simple question because he thought he was being difficult. A young parent seemed irritated from the moment they arrived until a tired child fell asleep in their arms, and suddenly the frustration on their face looked more like exhaustion than anger. I slowly realized that behavior and emotion were not always caused by the situation in front of me. One evening, after I quietly thanked a customer for waiting despite a delay, they sighed and admitted they had just come from a stressful appointment and felt embarrassed for sounding impatient. Walking home that night, I wondered how many arguments in everyday life happened because people reacted to invisible problems rather than visible ones. The work itself was physically tiring. Standing for hours left my feet aching. Weekends disappeared into rotating shifts, and I sometimes reached home too tired to think. I nearly quit after the second week, because I believed I simply was not built for that pace. Yet something unexpected happened. By the 4th week, my body adapted. Tasks that once required complete concentration became automatic, and I noticed I could stay calm during situations that would have overwhelmed me earlier. The limit I thought I had was not really a limit at all. It was only unfamiliar territory. Around that time, another coworker shared something that fascinated me. They told me researchers studying emergency medicine found that experienced teams often slow their movements during high-pressure moments, because rushing increases mistakes. I had assumed speed solved chaos, but watching skilled people confirmed the opposite. They moved deliberately, spoke clearly, and seemed almost calmer when everyone else became frantic. I started copying that habit. Instead of moving faster, I focused on moving without unnecessary motions, and surprisingly, I finished tasks sooner. It was one of those moments that genuinely changed the way I looked at pressure. Customers also became unexpected teachers. One regular visitor always paused before speaking and organized every request into short sentences. Another colleague explained that when people are stressed, giving choices in pairs instead of long lists often helps because the brain processes fewer options more comfortably. I tried it with confused customers by asking, "Would you prefer this or that?" rather than listing everything available, and conversations instantly became smoother. I never knew such a small communication adjustment could reduce tension for both sides until I experienced it repeatedly. Outside work, I began noticing changes in myself. I interrupted people less often during conversations because I had learned to listen for what they actually needed instead of preparing my next reply. I became slower to judge strangers because I had seen too many first impressions proven wrong. Even spending money felt different. After calculating how many hours of standing were represented by a casual purchase, I naturally became more selective without forcing myself to budget. One rainy evening, a coworker accidentally mixed up two orders, and a frustrated customer raised their voice. I expected blame to spread across the team, but the supervisor stepped forward and calmly accepted responsibility before privately solving the issue afterward. Later they explained that protecting trust in front of customers and discussing mistakes in private often prevents defensiveness and encourages learning. Watching that unfold taught me more about leadership than any classroom presentation I had attended. Not every day ended positively. There were shifts where nobody complimented good work, where effort went unnoticed, or where I replayed awkward conversations in my head all night. I once apologized repeatedly for a misunderstanding that was only partly my fault, because I wanted to keep the interaction peaceful. On the way home, I questioned whether I'd been too passive. A family member listened quietly before asking, "Would you rather win an argument or finish the day with your peace of mind?" The question lingered longer than the incident itself. Gradually, I stopped measuring success by praise or perfect outcomes, and started paying attention to whether I handled situations with honesty and consistency. Months later, when my service job ended, and I moved into a completely different field, I assumed those experiences would fade into the background. Instead, they appeared everywhere. Team meetings reminded me of busy shifts where priorities mattered more than panic. Difficult clients resembled stressed customers carrying burdens I could not see. New projects felt less intimidating because I had already learned that starting from zero was survivable. During one interview, I was asked to describe a challenge that shaped my approach to work, and I found myself smiling as I talked about cleaning tables, answering questions, fixing mistakes, and learning to stay composed while everything seemed to happen at once. The interviewer laughed softly and said those were harder skills to teach than technical knowledge. Looking back now, the strongest memory is not a dramatic confrontation or a moment of public recognition. It is a quiet image of locking the door after a late shift, stretching sore legs under the night sky, and realizing I had spent the entire day solving problems I once believed were beyond me. Nobody announced that I had become more patient or more resilient. There was no ceremony marking the change. It happened gradually through hundreds of ordinary interactions with strangers whose names I no longer remember, but whose influence remains. Sometimes, I still catch myself thanking someone in a service role a little more sincerely, or waiting a little more patiently when things run late, because I know there may be an unseen story unfolding behind the counter. And every so often, when life becomes noisy and overwhelming again, I remember that first whispered piece of advice during the busiest shift I ever worked. Choose the next important thing, deal with it carefully, and then move to the one after that. The room rarely becomes quieter, but somehow I do.